Can't believe I did this. Actually, yes I can. I can totally believe it.
Hello my friends, and welcome back to the Guitar Foster Parent. I'm John McLain, your host. Thank you for joining us today for another edition in our Harmony 2814 project. We've been working on this particular guitar for several weeks now, and we're making some good progress. Last time we were together, we worked on the fretboard. The fretboard on this guitar was very dirty and dry, which is very common. We talked about why that happens. And we have since completed reconditioning and cleaning the fretboard. I shot a YouTube short in between episodes because, as I suspected, it took another coat of oil. It soaked that oil up really quickly and still had kind of a dry, dull appearance. And so I added a nice thick coating of oil, let it sit overnight. Actually, I think I let it sit over 2 nights. And now the result is absolutely beautiful. And you can see how nice this fretboard looks. It's really been rejuvenated and has a rich and very attractive texture and feels nice to the fingers. Here's a look up close, kind of running down the fretboard, and you can really see the difference that we've made. Well, today on this episode, we're going to talk about the input jack. Our good friend Mark Keeler, who's a viewer at the Guitar Foster Parent, had a great suggestion a number of weeks ago and said, why not go ahead while you're in there and put in a nice multi-point jack from Pure Tone? Well, we're going to do that today. Here is the Pure Tone multi-point jack. You can find these on the internet. They're not very expensive at all, just a few bucks. And we're going to be soldering in a new Pure Tone input jack into the old Harmony today to replace this single point jack. I did notice as I plugged the guitar in and gave it its initial run through that the jack is a little sloppy. You know, often when you're playing a guitar and you have crackling sounds or an interruption in your connection, this input jack can often be the culprit. Because these single point jacks, there's a leaf inside, and here's an up close look at what the jack looks like. There's a leaf inside there that presses against the tip of your guitar cable and provides the connection to your pickups. If that connection gets loose at all, that connection breaks, it can cause crackling and different problems. And of course, if it's too loose, your guitar cable can actually come out of the guitar. I had that actually happen at a gig one time when I was a teenager. My cable completely came out of the front of my bass. Of course, I probably should mention, for honesty's sake, that I actually walked too far away from my amplifier and my cable was not long enough, and boom! It was one of my great stage moments, and the reason I'm not a rock star today, one of many. In any event, we're going to be soldering in a new Pure Tone multi-point jack today on the Guitar Foster Parent. Before we get started, I want to thank you for helping us grow. What we do here, if you're new to the channel, is we take in guitars just like this guy. I acquired this from a collector here in Dallas that was looking to thin out his herd a little bit. This guitar hadn't been played in a long time. And so I acquired it. I'm fostering it, and what I'm going to do is after we get it all fixed up and playing and looking nice, I'm going to donate it to a deserving home that will care for it and play it and not stick it in a closet. And there are a lot of folks that either can't afford a guitar or maybe, just for whatever reason don't have one of their own. We're going to send this out to somebody, and if you'd like to nominate a deserving forever home for this Harmony 2814 when it's completed, you can do that down in the comments below this video, or you can send me an email at john@guitarfosterparent.com. And I will put you on the list, and we'll select a deserving home, and we'll give this baby away when it's all completed so it can make music for many, many years to come. Also, I'd encourage you to subscribe to the channel by clicking on the button on the lower right corner of this video screen, and that way you can come along with us for many, many projects. As soon as we're done with this one, we've got a cool Strat project coming up that we were going to work on in the coming weeks as soon as we finish up this harmony. So again, subscribe and like this video. It helps us out a lot. It helps people find us and helps us put more of these guitars into the hands of people that will make music with them. Thank you for that. All right, Mark, we're going to put an input jack, as you suggested, into this harmony today. Let's talk about soldering for just a moment. I am very excited to have acquired this. This is a soldering iron, and it says it's an Akalox, new Akalox soldering iron gun. Now, I want to make something clear. This is really not, despite its appearance, a soldering gun. Soldering guns apply heat when the trigger is pulled, okay? This one has a switch on the top. You can see the power switch. So this is really a soldering iron that's shaped like a soldering gun. And I say this because if you've worked with soldering guns and soldering irons, there is a difference. Soldering irons are hot all the time when they're either plugged in or if they have a switch like this one, they're turned on. This one is off right now, so I can handle it without worrying about burning myself. But some genius did something that if I would have had the brains, I would have invented this years ago, because I've often wondered, why can't we have a soldering iron that will feed the wire much like a flux welder does? Down in my garage, I have a flux welder that feeds the wire through the middle of the welding wand and then will provide the wire right to your work. Now, of course, in welding, you apply the wire to the actual work. Here, the solder will drip onto and make the connection of the wire. But soldering, especially in small and tight areas, which is usually what soldering is, you're usually soldering small wires together, and often in tight spaces, can be an immensely frustrating exercise. You know, when I did the OG bass back here, I used this guy, which looks a lot like a metal crab. This is called helping hands. And what this does is you can adjust these little clips, you know, really any way you need to hold the work together, and then you can use that to solder. Even with these, I found soldering to be an immensely frustrating exercise. I'm a bit ham-handed, and I would never have made a good surgeon. But I am excited to try this guy out. I've never used it before. But I've tested the feeding mechanism, and I think this is going to be a game changer for my soldering. The trigger on this soldering iron actually advances the wire through the mechanism inside the housing here. Very, very ingenious. Now, if this thing stinks, we'll find out, because like I say, I've never used it before. If I like it, I'll put a link down below in the comments where you can snag one if you're interested. This was well under $100 on Amazon. So, but we'll see if it works. So we'll do that today. I'm going to go ahead and turn the soldering iron on. A word of caution, again, it's an iron. So this thing is hot all the time. I am not going to lay this hot iron down on my white surface towel that I'm using on my workbench. That could cause a fire. Please, please be very, very careful when handling soldering irons. These get extremely hot, like burn you to the bone hot. And of course, they can cause a fire when they encounter anything combustible at all. So be very, very careful with these. I would highly recommend either fashioning a stand, and it would have been nice if this would have come with a stand of some sort. It doesn't. I've actually discovered that if I lay it on a flat surface like this, if you imagine my arm as a bench, it will stand up, but again, it's not very stable and it's not safe. So I'm going to get a metal plate of some kind to set this on so that it can't burn, because again, this thing's hot all the time while the switch is on, and it stays hot even when the switch is off until it cools. So again, please, please be very, very careful. So here's the basics of soldering. What soldering does is it takes this soldering wire, okay, this is a lead-free wire, and a lot of them are now. It melts it, and it connects two wires together in a conductive manner. Inside the guitar circuitry, all these connections are soldered. And so what we're going to do is, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the old solder and take out the input jack in the guitar. We're going to unthread this nut on the top, and I'll show you all this here in a moment. And then we're going to remove the pick guard, flip it over, and we're going to remove the old solder using this vacuum tool. I'll show you how this thing works. It basically will slurp up the old solder into this chamber, which is metal, so it's safe. And then we'll have clean connections, and then we will solder in this wonderful new pure tone multi-point jack. Without further ado, let's go ahead and remove the top nut, and then we'll talk about how we're going to get in here and see the electronics. Well, here is our new pure tone jack. Pretty simple operation. You've probably seen these. This is just a very thin nut. This nut will unthread off the end of the jack. Okay, this is the new one, but these are all pretty much designed the same way. We're going to remove this nut, set it aside. There's a washer here that will go on top of the pick guard, so we'll set it aside. And then the jack will thread up under the hole in the pick guard, okay? What we'll do is we'll loosely mount this so that we can turn it and get our connections where we want them to be. We're going to align the ears, and you can see these little ears right here. These are where the wires are going to be. One will be a ground that goes to the common black wire ground of the guitar, and the other one will be the red wire, which will be sending the signal out the input jack into the amplifier. Okay, just two simple connections here, and so we'll be doing that next. The first step, though, is to remove the nut on the old jack. For that, I'm going to use a nut driver. I would like to remind folks, whenever you're working on a guitar, anytime you apply a metal tool of any kind, whether it's a file, a screwdriver, a nut driver, anything, you have the potential to damage the guitar. These plastic pick guards are softer than metal. This finish is softer than metal. So be very careful. I use the word surgery a lot, which is pretty dorky, but that's kind of my mental picture as I work on these things. I try to pretend I'm a surgeon, and I take my time, and I'm very, very careful. So in this case, I'm going to very carefully remove this nut. And there's not many threads. This shouldn't take any time at all. Just find you a socket that fits it, and now we can just take it off with our finger. Simple enough. And again, here's the washer. If we can get it. There we go. And now we're going to lift the pick guard out of the guitar, and the input jack should essentially fall right out. We've already removed all of our screws, by the way, for the pick guard. We did that a few weeks ago. Now we're going to carefully turn this over, and you can see that the jack just came right out. See? No big deal. You can see this is quite dirty here. There's some plastic residue. Look at that. You know what's funny? When these guitars are new, and I saw this on the OG bass, this little plastic ring. When these guitars ship, they put protective plastic, just like they do anytime you have a piece of plastic on a new toy. They're going to put plastic on there, and then when you buy it, people rip the plastic off, and very often these little rings are left underneath. So we're going to throw this away. That's just old shipping plastic. We don't want that on our Harmony. And there's a little bit of, finger grunge and dirt. We're going to clean that up. We'll do that at the end. Now let's flip this over. And the only way, by the way, that on this particular guitar, and this is common with a lot of Strat style setups, the electronics are fastened to the pick guard instead of to the guitar, and which can be kind of convenient because you kind of have an electronics pack here. The only way that this is connected to the guitar at this point is through the ground wire, and we talked about the ground wire earlier. I'm going to tilt this up a little bit where maybe you can see it a little better, but remember our ground wire that's coiled around a screw here on this bridge, which is removed. We'll put it on, of course, when we're done. This wire runs through an angle drilled hole down into the electronics chamber inside the guitar. So what we're going to do, and I like to do this because it's safer. Again, we could flip this over And this is what I did with the OG base at first, and then I changed my mind. We could flip this over, we could put a towel here so that this doesn't get scratched, and we could actually do the work right here. I mean, here's the jack, as you can see, and we could go ahead and do our work. Here's the problem, though. By doing that, we expose the guitar, the pretty part of the guitar, to hot solder. Hot solder will, of course, damage this clear coat, even worse than it, it's a used guitar. So it's much safer to go ahead and remove this entire thing from the guitar. And the way we do that is remove the ground wire from the guitar body. Then we can set the body aside where it's nice and safe, and we can work on this by itself. Don't worry. Sometimes these holes, in this guitar it's pretty small. How am I going to get the wire back through here? A great way to do it, use an old guitar string and fish it through. That's what we're going to do here. I'm going to show you that. For right now, I'm just going to use a shop towel to briefly protect. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to straighten out this wire, which is just wrapped in a coil right here so that it can ground to the screw. I'm just going to straighten this wire out and pull it on through, knowing we can fish it back through when we're done. It's a safer way. Again, there's nothing wrong with putting, and I would not use a paper towel for this, but something and doing the work here, but it's just a safer thing to remove it. We'll be able to move around better, and I can actually get it closer to the camera for you as well. So let's go ahead and remove the ground wire now. And you want to be careful when you do this, because these little thin wires can poke your finger. But it's just, you're just straightening it out. Okay, and you can see they stripped off quite a bit of wire here to make this connection, and you can see also a lot of these thin wires are broken. No big deal. We can fix that when we get back to it. The key is to get it straight so that you can pull it right on through this ground wire channel here. Just pull it on through, and again, if you damage this wire, we can fix it. And there you go. It's pulled on through. So now this is completely free of the guitar. So we're going to set this guitar on a stand out of the way, and then we'll get to work here. All right, well, our guitar body is out of the way on a guitar stand where it's nice and safe, and now we've got the business of the guitar completely removed. Here's our ground wire. And the way that this is done pretty much on every guitar I've ever seen, and again, I'll go ahead and give you a disclaimer, I am far from an electronics expert, but this is actually a pretty simple concept. Single coil pickups have one wire per coil, and so these two single coils have one wire per coil. They're color coded. The red goes to this one, which is the neck pickup. The bridge pickup is the yellow wire on this guitar. And these wires are soldered to the pots. Now, we talked about earlier, we tested these pots. I think they sound fine, so we're not going to replace these. This is a pretty detailed process, and if you'd like to get a good laugh, you can go back to my OG bass videos where I actually did replace the pots, and I learned a lot, some of it the hard way, when I did that. The good news is, the pots on that guitar were shot. These are pretty good. They sound, in fact, they sound great. I couldn't get them to fail, so we're going to leave that alone. But we are going to replace this guy. This input jack right here is a single contact jack. And I don't know if you can see, this leaf right here is the only thing, it's kind of a spring, and it's the only thing that contacts the tip of your guitar cable. So what I'm going to show you here, and I have a guitar cable, and you may have seen this before, but if not, this might be kind of interesting. When you plug a guitar in, you can see that leaf grabs the tip of your guitar cable. If this gets sprung or is loose at all, this connection is not going to be solid, and you're going to have noise and disconnection problems. And this is very often because, you plug this in and unplug it and plug it in and unplug it, 1,000 times. This could get some metal fatigue. And it's just not a very good connection. Look, I can just very easily pull this out with very little strength at all. Here's the deal with this multi-point jack that we're going to install. You can see this one has two leaves on the top. Multi-point connectivity. And so when I plug this in, I'm going to be careful here because I might not be able to get it out easily. This
is a much more positive connection. You've got two leaves gripping the tip of your guitar cable on this one, and there, oh, see, it wasn't even in all the way. That baby is not going to come out without some significant effort. And so that's what we want to do, is this multi-point jack. There we go. Yeah, it took some effort to get that out. So we're going to solder this in, but that's how that works with the guitar cable. Oh, by the way, I wanted to show you something I thought of. I'm going to use my helping hands that I'm not going to have to use for the actual soldering as a stand for my gun. I've turned it on. You can see the tip is starting to discolor, which because it's getting hot. This is new. I've never used it. But that's this is going to be a stand, so you can see this is how, and it'll be off camera a lot of the time, but I'm just going to take this and very carefully set this on there, and it's pretty solid. It's not going to slip off, and this won't burn, keeps the hot end up in the air, and I'm going to set it over here out of the way. So wanted to mention that. All right, so let's go through, like any good surgeon would do, let's talk about the operation before we go to cutting. 2 wires, as I mentioned before. Black, which is all connected to this common ground, and red, which goes to this pickup and then through the pots is all connected into one big circuit. So what we're going to do is we're going to first remove the solder. You can see the solder, the little metallic, molten metallic goo there that holds these wires to this jack. We're going to heat this, and we're going to remove it with this solder vacuum tool. This is kind of a cool thing. You can see there's a tip right here, and then there's a plunger at the top. What you do is you press down the plunger until it locks, see? And then there's a release button right here. When the solder is hot and molten, it's liquid, you apply this tip, and you can see there's a small hole in the end of the tip. You apply this, and when you press this, this vacuum plunger is going to go, and it's going to suck the old solder up into this metal chamber where it's not going to burn anything or get in the way, and it's not going to drip all over your work. And so what you do is when you get this on the solder, you press the button, and I don't know if you heard it, but it sucked in a bunch of air there. There's a plunger inside here. Kind of a cool tool. So I'm going to go ahead and depress the plunger so it'll be ready when it's time to remove the old solder from this input jack. Now, since we're not applying any new solder, we won't be using the trigger on this soldering iron with the wire feeder. I'm so excited about using this thing, by the way. This is going to be so much easier than having to hold all the wires with the helping hands and everything. Hopefully this is going to be a game-changing thing. But what we're going to do with the tip of the iron is we're going to melt the solder on the old jack, and then we're going to remove it using the plunger. Now, a word of caution, you might say, well, couldn't hot solder drip onto this plastic pick guard? Yes, absolutely. That's a distinct possibility. So we're going to take steps to protect this from the solder from dripping on here. There's a couple ways we could do that. We could actually turn it over like this and do it that way, but that doesn't really work, and that exposes the finished side of the pick guard. Now, this is the underside of the pick guard, and so there's a chance that if anything hot drips on here, it'll never show, but that's too risky, I think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask this off with some aluminum foil. And what that will do is that aluminum foil will catch the hot solder, and it will protect it, stop, the foil will dissipate the heat, and the solder will cool very quickly and solidify, and that will keep it from dripping on here. So I'm going to go grab a small sheet of aluminum foil and mask this off, and then we'll start melting this off, and we'll get this old input jack removed. This is just a sheet of food service foil, so I'm going to use it to make a shield here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm probably just going to wrap it around a little bit just to kind of keep it in place. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. The key is just to protect. I'm also going to try to set it up where you can see as I work what I'm doing here. Let me get it. There we go. That's better. And there, hopefully this foil isn't reflecting too much. But again, I want to protect this guitar. So basically what we're going to do is I'm going to hold this, and I'm going to very carefully touch this, this old solder here, melt it away, and try to suck it out with this plunger vacuum tool. Here we go.
My iron is hot. It's been sitting here heating up for some time. I don't know if it's hot enough. We're about to find out from where I'm positioned to do the red one first. So we'll do that one first. It doesn't matter as long as they both come off. By the way, sometimes when you're doing this, it helps to kind of wiggle the wire to kind of break it loose. There we go. You see how it's burning? There we go. I didn't even need to slurp it off. Now see what we've got there now. And again, I'm going to be very careful with my iron. Put it on my little makeshift stand here. This wire is very clean. The solder came right off and stayed on the input jack. And again, we're going to throw this old input jack away, so we don't need to worry about cleaning it up. We actually didn't need to remove any solder with our plunger, which is nice. So, take this wire, kind of set it over to the side. And now let's remove the black one in the same manner. All right, couple of notes here. I'm going to let this cool before I touch it again. This gets hot very, very quickly. A couple of notes, and you may have noticed this in the video. There's a lot of smoke that comes when the solder is melting. That's flux smoke, and it's really not good to breathe. Now, again, it's not going to poison you. You don't need to wear a respirator or anything like that. But it's best not to, if it's coming up in your face, it's best to kind of tilt away from it, kind of, blow it away so that it's not getting into your lungs. It's not good for you to breathe, so be careful about that. Another thing you noticed, and again, I did this on the black wire, and I'm kind of glad I did. I will say it was on purpose, even though it wasn't, is this will melt solder. It also melts the insulation off the wire, and so I don't know if you can see here, but I got a little sloppy with the iron tip, and I got and melted some of the insulation off of this wire. And it's important that that insulation, this is okay to touch now, it's not hot anymore, that insulation has now caused this wire to become bent and everything, and so I'm going to clean this up and strip some of this burnt insulation off. It's best not to do that if you can help it. But we have now removed our old input jack, and so you can even see on here some of that black plastic melted on there. That was not, you're not supposed to do that. A more skilled solderer would have been able to knock that right out. No worries though, we'll clean this wire up. That'll be our next step. And then we'll start talking about how we're going to solder on the new jack. Well, here's a close-up of the wire I talked about where I charred and burned the insulation, and yeah, look at that. You can see that I really did a number on that. No worries, we're going to clean that up right now. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the foil so you can see better. And again, I'm not soldering right now, so there's no need to protect the surface. If you've ever stripped a wire, this is basically what we're going to do now. We're going to take a blade and we're going to clean this wire up. Now I'm going to try to bend this a little bit. I'm going to get in close. Look at the red wire that I actually did correctly. You can see, get in the light there, see how clean that tip is, how nice. There's really not much, in terms of just a clean wire tip versus the black one. I'm going to try to make this wire look like this one. Again, the great thing about the inside of the guitar is neatness doesn't count as long as you're not shorting, and that's one thing you want to watch out. If your solder goes across multiple connections, then it's going to short and the guitar is not going to work correctly or at all. And so you've got to be very careful that only the wires are soldered to only the points you want them soldered to. Again, input jack, pretty simple. All we're going to do, there's a leaf for the tip and a leaf for the sleeve. And as long as we get those lined up correctly, then we're going to be in tall cotton. So no worries there. All right, so I'm going to take a blade and I'm going to very carefully clean this up. Be very careful not to cut myself. And so let's do that now. The good news is when this insulation is burned, it's somewhat brittle. Can't believe I did this. Actually, yes I can.
I can totally believe it. All right, so now I'm just using my fingernail. And again, this is just a kind of a tedious job. Let's get that out of the way. And I think that we're gonna, just kind of pull it off there. Yeah, okay, you know what? It wasn't as bad as I thought. Now we've got the wire kind of straightened out. And the key is you want to get all the plastic off the end so you get a nice connection when you solder the thing. And now we have that. Okay, terrific. So now we'll clean up. Let's put our heat shield back because it's time to solder some more. Now you may be asking yourself an excellent question, and that is, which wire goes to which ear? Are they the same? No, they're not. And so one thing, I should have showed you this before I took the old one off, but you need to mark which one goes to which ear, especially if you're new at this. Here's the old jack, and since I burned the insulation, we have evidence on which one is which. If you'll notice on these jacks, one of these ears where we solder the wires is connected to one of the plates, and one of the other ear is connected to the other plate. And that will have an impact on how your jack works. So you need to make sure, you can see on this jack the black wire, as evidenced by the charred insulation here, is connected to the lower ear, that is connected to this lower plate, and then the upper one is connected to the upper. We need to do the same thing with the new jack. And so as you look at the new jack, you'll see same thing, two ears, one's connected to the upper, one's connected to the lower. So on this jack, the black wire, which was connected to the lower on the old jack, is going to be connected to this ear, and then the red wire will connect to this one. So that mystery being solved, now it's time for the fun part. We're going to finally test our wire feed function on this soldering iron. So I'm very excited about that. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to, it doesn't matter which wire you do first. And so what we're going to do, there's a hole in the middle of this ear, and that's where the wire is going to go. One thing I like to do is make a little hook in the end of the wire to kind of help it hold in there. And I'm not talking about like a completely bent around, but just like a 90-degree angle. And what that will do is that will allow, and I'm going to take a pair of pliers to do this. Grab a pair of pliers out of my drawer here. Yeah, here we go. What that will do is it will kind of allow me to cheat a little bit so that I don't have to hold. So just, bend like a little 90 degree. There we go. That'll be perfect. Okay, now I'm going to hook under and just let this rest, okay? What we want to do is apply a tiny amount of solder to, see how I'm able to hold that with the wire? That's the idea of the hook. It helps you to know that you're connected to the right thing. I'm going to take our iron and I'm going to click the trigger, and you can see it's advancing the solder wire toward the tip. And as it gets closer, oh yeah, see? So here we go. Let's try this baby out. You want to apply the tip of the hot iron to the work. Yeah, not quite. Hey. Ooh, that's hot. I think we've got a good connection. We're going to let it cool a little bit. Again, one thing you want to do is make sure you give this, kind of 30 seconds or so is probably enough to let this solidify, because if you test it too soon, the solder may be soft in the middle and boom, you'll lose your connection. I've done that, I don't know, probably 500 times. All right, so blow on a little bit. and see and how it's working. It's amazing. These metals are all very conductive. They have to be, right? Because you're transferring current. And so when you touch the soldering iron to this thing, and I'm touching it over here, my finger was getting very hot within 2 or 3 seconds. Very conductive, lots of heat. So be aware of that. And now let's test. And that's a good connection. So what you want to do, and again, this is not designed, you can't hang from a bridge by this. Like you can do with welds. But this is just designed to hold this wire, and it looks pretty good. The other thing you want to do is check around, make sure that the metal is contacted very solidly, and it is. That's a good connection. I think I like this thing. By the way, you probably saw some solder dripping off. Here's a piece of it right here. This is a lead-free solder. So it's relatively safe, but again, some solders have lead in them. I think they still sell those. Be careful, all right? These little BBs, don't play with them. Certainly don't drop them on the floor and leave them because they can be toxic. Again, this is a non-lead solder wire, and I think most of them are now. But again, just be careful. Keep it clean. All right, let's move on to the red wire now. Same procedure. I'm going to take my little pliers and make a tiny little 90-degree hook in the top of it. I'm going to straighten it out a little bit with my fingers. These are very thin. So again, it's delicate. Remember, you're a surgeon. So I'm going to take my pliers. Why am I not using needle nose pliers? Because I don't have any right now and I'm too lazy to go down and get them. But this will work just fine. Just take the tip, bend it ever so slightly. There we go. That's all you need. Just a little hook to hold the jack up. So now we're going to turn and hook our red wire in, metal to metal, just like that. I'm going to put a little more bend in this wire, just a touch, to give it a better, so much of doing this, by the way, is trial and error. And that's how we learn to do anything, isn't it? We learn by making mistakes. And if you've been following this channel for a while, you know that if there's one thing I excel at, it's by making mistakes. But I learn, and I have fun. All right, now see, now I like that because the red insulation is not touching. That's better. Okay, I'm going to move my finger away from the work so that I don't burn myself. And now, let's take our wire feeding solder gun. Let's preheat this a little bit and introduce some solder. Yeah, see, that didn't connect. So we're going to try again. By the way, I've noticed with this thing, solder is heavy. When it melts, it wants to drip off. This is going to be much better if you orient the iron straight down, I've discovered. Did that get it? I'm going to apply a little bit more. Okay, set our iron aside for just a moment. Now, I'm going to let this cool. I don't know if you can see on here. Do you see a kind of a yellowy, sticky substance? While this cools, let's talk about flux. This is rosin paste flux. I'm going to show you what it looks like. It's just kind of a pasty yellow. It looks like grease, but it isn't. Flux is necessary for soldering. What flux does, simply stated, is it provides adhesion for solder. Solder won't stick to anything without flux. Now, most solder wires, like this one we're using, is a flux core solder wire, meaning this goo, this flux, is in the middle of the wire. So when it melts, the flux flows out and guides the solder and allows it to adhere. Sometimes when you're soldering, you'll see some of that flux leaching out. Totally harmless. Often when you're doing projects, especially with larger wires, one time I was soldering some landscape wire and it was a heavier gauge. I actually bought this so that I could dunk the tips into the flux to allow the solder to flow between the threads of the braided wire. But that's what you're seeing if you see that. Again, this is the stuff that smokes, and it's not good to breathe. So if you see the smoke coming up, just kind of tilt your head away. Again, it's not going to poison you, but you shouldn't be sucking it into your nostrils. That's not a good thing. So that's what flux is. All right, let's test our connection. I'm not super confident about this one, but you know what? Maybe I should be. It seems to be pretty good. Now, you may have noticed I had dropped a blob of solder on the side there, and you can see it slipped right off, so no problem. Again, we're going to be careful not to lose these BBs. We don't want them getting away from us. All right, I don't like how that looks, though. Well, yeah, see how that's wiggling? That's not good enough. It's connected, but as this guitar gets moved around, banged around, unplugged, replugged, unplugged, replugged, this is all going to flex. This is eventually going to break loose. So let's try again to make a better connection. One other thing I've noticed about this soldering iron, and again, nothing's perfect. I still like the idea of it, but when this wire, and it's pretty thin wire, when it gets close to the iron, it gets very soft. And you can see it started to move off a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cook off a little bit of it, like I just did. And then we're going to get in here and try to give this a little more confidence. Let's see if we can get that solder into the hole there. Oh yeah, okay, now we're cooking. Let's set that on my little stand. Okay, now, see how the solder, and I don't know if you can see this or not. Here's a close-up of it. If you saw how the solder flowed and filled the hole, that's really the best connection. All right, we're gonna let these sit for a minute and cool and solidify. And then we're going to do an inspection. What we're looking for is shorts. I want to make sure that I don't have any stray solder blobs that are connecting to any other metal parts on this jack that's going to cause a short. Also want to make sure that I don't have any insulation caught up in there, and I can tell by looking right now that I don't. And then it'll be time to talk about mounting this back into the pick guard, and we'll be almost done. So I'm going to go grab something to drink for a minute and give this some good time again. I want to give it probably 5-10 minutes to get good and cool, because sometimes this molten solder can stay warm in the middle and cause your connections to get loosey-goosey. So we'll be back in about 5. Okay, well, it's been about 10 minutes, and let's check it out. I'm going to go ahead and remove the heat shield. It'll be easier for you to see. And again, I'm going to be careful not to lose those BBs. I've also turned off my soldering iron because I'm supremely confident that we're done. Yeah, I really like how these look. They're very, very good. I'm going to test these. And again, you don't want to yank on it like, you don't want to put 50 pounds of pressure on these connections, okay? But, you just want to give them a wiggle, make sure that, yeah, those are solid. Also, look around carefully, and you may want to use a magnifying glass if you don't see real well. And just make sure you don't have any stray blobs. It's not rocket science. It's pretty clean. Yeah, it looks good. All right. Well, the next step, as you might imagine, is pretty darn simple. It's time to mount it back into the pick guard. What we're going to do is flip this baby over and do a little cleaning here around where the connection is. Again, we want to make things as clean as possible. There's a little bit of grime there. So what I'm going to do is just take a little Dunlop's guitar polish, model or Formula 65, great stuff. Give it a shake. And I'm just going to, just a touch. That's all you need. We're going to use a lot of this when we're done doing our final cleaning on this guitar. And just clean, you can see it polished right off, and then take a dry and just polish it up. This is such good stuff. I love this. By the way, if you have a piano that has a lacquer finish, this works great on that too. There you go. That's all we need to do. Set this aside. All right. Now, again, there's no magic formula to this. All you're doing is feeding this through the hole. And you want to put as little stress on the wires as possible. You can orient this any way you want. But basically, you just push it up through the hole. And it should be snug, and this one is. Just kind of work the threads through the hole. Again, you don't want to put the stress on these solders you just made. I almost said welds. Okay, once that's done, take your washer, all right, and your nut that came with your new jack, finger thread. Okay, and then, I don't know why this has a ratchet, really not necessary for this. Now, you might notice that we didn't push it all the way up. What we're going to do is we're going to allow the tool to do that, but we're going to hold this oriented as we want it. Okay, and I think that's pretty much how I want it, right like that. So I'm going to hold it underneath. Okay, and then, again, being very careful, very deliberate, go ahead and turn this right on around until it's mounted nice and snug. Again, you don't have to put this to 100 foot-pounds, just snug like that. The washer should hold it. And there you go. A brand new multi-point pure tone input jack. Again, I always like to check my connections after we've done anything. The rest of this stuff is fine. Now, let's work briefly on our ground wire. Let's flip our work back over here. Let's talk about the ground wire. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fish this back through on the guitar, and then I'm going to see how much wire I have to play with. This is pretty long. I mean, you can see they gave us a nice long piece of wire. I may snip this off and strip me a new piece because I want more strands than this. I mean, this is kind of a bird nest at the end. Probably will work fine, but since I'm in here, why not do it right? So I'm going to get the guitar off the stand, put it back on the bench. We're going to thread this back through the hole. We'll fish it through using a guitar string. And then we're going to finally just prepare this to be grounded to the bridge. We're not ready to remount the bridge yet. That'll be toward the end of the project. And we may need to prep this wire for a fresh ground. So let's do that now. All right, guitar's back on the bench now. And again, here is the channel for the ground wire. It's drilled, and see this, even this tiny screwdriver is too big to pass through it. Well, maybe it isn't. So what we want to do, and this hole comes out down here, what we want to do is fish this wire back up through this hole and then see what kind of length we have. What we may have to do, and again, I'm doing this right before your eyes, if this wire is not long enough to trim and restrip for a new ground connection, I may wind up having to solder on a new length of ground wire, which we won't have time to do today, but that will involve melting off the solder from the bottom, the ground area of the volume, or the volume pot, and then soldering on a new connection. Don't think that's going to be necessary. I mean, this wire, you can just see by eyeballing it, this wire is quite long. I think it's going to be fine. But the first step is to fish this back through. I'm going to go ahead and snip off this bird nest on the end because I know I don't want that. So just snip right here. And now we've got kind of a smoother end. I'm going to give this a little twist. Okay. And I'm pretty sure I can fish this through on my own. We're going to try that first. If not, we'll take an old guitar string and fish it through. So again,
just to be, I know you're probably saying, you just set that on there without anything under it. You're right, I'm sorry. Okay, so here we go. This might not work because this is kind of flimsy, but we'll try it. Yeah, so fish it through the hole, on up, and if you can get the insulation in, yeah, see, that's not wanting to go in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an old guitar string and we'll kind of fish it. If you ever used a fish tape before, this is the same kind of concept. So I'm going to get a guitar string. So this is one of the strings that I took off the guitar. We're not going to reuse them, of course. Take a wound one. They grip better. And so I'm just going to snip off. This is the end that was on the, that was tuned up. I'm going to snip that off with my snippers. Now I've got a smooth end, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to fish it down through this way. Pull it out the other end. Again, you want to be careful here because you don't want this to mar up the surface. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these two in a way that will hopefully fish this through. Now the problem here is that this wire is very slippery, but we're going to make an attempt to do it anyway. This is not as easy as it seems, by the way, but I've had it work. And so, you know, kind of pull it through. And voila! There we go. Ground wire is fished through, and now our pick guard is part of our guitar again. So, set this old guitar string aside. We're done with it. Now, here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to place the pick guard back in the guitar chamber just to be, and then we're going to test to see how much wire we have to work with. It looks like that we've got plenty. I mean, look at this. We have enough to ground already, and we're not even in. But just for the sake of due diligence, I'm going to remove my protective towel here, pull this wire through, tuck these wires down. Look at our nice new input jack. Set the pick guard in place. There we go. And now you can see I have ample ground wire. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to snip this wire off right here at the end. Okay, because this is mangled. I want a good ground. So snip that off at the end, and then I'm going to just strip a pretty good amount of this wire here so that I can wrap it around the screw. And you can see there's, and I haven't even pulled it all through, there's still even more. So kudos to Harmony for giving you lots of ground wire. Now, you can see we've done exactly what we wanted to do. I'm just going to give this a twist. Twist these strands up. Boom, done. Now our input jack is installed. We are done with the electronics of this guitar. So I'm going to set this back down in here. By the way, when you're doing this, make sure you look and make sure you don't have any wires pinched underneath here. If you get a wire pinched under, especially on one of these screw holes, and you ding it with a screw, you're going to get a short. And you'll wonder why your guitar doesn't work. All right, so here's our ground wire prepped and ready to go. What I'm going to do, just to keep everything neat, I'm going to replace one screw, doesn't matter which one. And again, surgeon. Very careful. You slip with this, you're going to dork it up. So just very careful. Take your time. Enjoy the process. Everybody's in such a hurry nowadays. Everybody's hair's on fire. All right, so I'm just going to you don't have to make it, just there. that'll hold the pick guard in place until we're ready to do the final cleaning and get it shored up. All right, well, what a fun day we've had, mainly because we didn't burn ourselves. Here's what we did. We got a brand new multi-point pure tone input jack in this old Harmony. It's going to grip that cable nice and tight. We also did a little cleanup work on our grounding wire. We're done with the electronics. I am going to do a little cleaning, and we'll do that at the beginning of the next time we're together. I'll take a Q-tip. There's some dirt, you know. I mean, I can feel some grime. We're going to clean all the nooks and crannies, do a detailed job, kind of like you do on your car. All around this guitar, I'm going to clean some of the, you know, the finger stuff off of these pots, these knobs rather, and get them all nice and clean like they're supposed to be. Also, I want to mention briefly the frets on this guitar. The frets are a little grooved here and there. I don't think I'm concerned about them so much. I am going to polish them. So before we put strings on, we're going to go ahead and polish these frets and see if they are going to be okay without dressing them or anything like that. To do that, I have some special polish I'll show you and a little protective template. That fret polish is not good for the wood, it's just for the metal of the frets. So I have a little kit from Music Nomad that has a little protective jig that you put on here to keep the polish off the wood, but enables you to polish these frets. I'm hoping with a little polish we can smooth these out some. If not, we may have to get a little more aggressive. We'll talk about that on the next Guitar Foster Parent. If we get that far, then we can start talking about adjusting the action on the guitar and how that works on this type of bridge setup. And of course, remember, we did install a new nut, which means we'll probably have to do some filing there. But we're getting closer. It's pretty exciting. Also, before we go, I'd like to give you a little review of this guy. Remember, we talked about how this was its maiden voyage in my shop. I've always dreamed of having a wire-feeding soldering iron. And this one says soldering iron gun, which is kind of clever because it's sort of both, but it's really a soldering iron. I like this thing. It's not, you know, it doesn't make soldering easy as pie, but it is way easier than, you know, taking the helping hands and trying to, you know, rig up a little thing to make a simple connection. I found that this really did help being able to feed the wire with a click of the trigger. And so yeah, I love that it has an on and off switch. It's pretty well made. I mean, it's not, you know, certainly not a commercial grade tool, but for a hobbyist, it's great. Here's a look at the brand. I will give you the link in the, to where I got it. It's an Amazon purchase. I'll give you a link if you'd like to put one of these in your shop. I'd recommend it. It's pretty cool. Again, it does not have a stand. I found that my helping hands worked great. You know, just kind of set it on the table like that to keep the tip away from anything that could burn or melt. And just kind of keep it up in the air, out of the way where I wouldn't contact it and burn myself. It would be cool if they made a stand for this, and I may fabricate one of my own out of spare materials when I get some spare time one of these years. But yeah, I like this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and give a link below and how you can get a hold of one if you'd like to, and it will have a permanent home in the shop of the Guitar Foster Parent. If you've enjoyed this episode, again, please subscribe. There's a button right on the lower right-hand corner. I'm not going to spam you with a bunch of email or ask you for money or anything like that. It's just that you'll be made aware when we have new episodes coming out on the Guitar Foster Parent. And remember, when this Harmony is done, we're going to donate it to a forever home. And it's got to be somebody who, A, will play the guitar, and B, will take good care of it. If they're going to put it in a closet and not play it, then they don't qualify. But if you know of a forever home, and you know, some examples may be a veteran that you know, that or somebody that's down on their luck, maybe somebody that lost their job and had to sell their guitar. I've known people that have been in those shoes before. What a blessing it would be to say, you know what, here you go, make music again. That's really the heart of the Guitar Foster Parent. You know, we have a lot of fun tinkering and learning together, which is great, but what I really love about what we do here is putting these instruments into the hands of people that will make music with them. This guitar, like I say, was gotten from somebody who, you know, had other stuff and they hadn't played this. And so if you'd like to nominate somebody, you do that in the comments below. Just say, I'd like to nominate so-and-so. If you'd like to keep it private, by the way, I have an inbox for that, john@guitarfosterparent.com. You can go ahead and make your nomination there as well, and I will keep that confidential.
So like and subscribe, share this with your friends, and join us for the next time on the Guitar Foster Parent. Bye-bye for now.